Bloomberg QuickTake, I'm Madison Mills. Election results are coming in, but we are still waiting for results from a selection of key battleground states. Right now, we're seeing that Biden is at 209 electoral votes and Trump is at 118. We're still waiting for more information from key states like Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Texas, and more. But we have an expert from Bloomberg, Jeff Taylor, here joining us to tell us more about what we can expect to come from these key states. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. First off, can you just walk me through the latest on where we're at with some of the recent data we're getting from these election results tonight?
Well, the script has largely gone as expected this evening so far. I mean, Biden has won the states that he's been expected to win, mostly urban states in the North and the West. And Trump has won the states that he's been expected to win, the big southern states, states across the Sun Belt. And now we're getting down to the nitty gritty of it, which is the Midwestern battleground states, the so-called battleground states. They're not all in the Midwest, but many of them are. The biggest ones are. And that's where the election probably will be truly decided. Those states include Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and I understand Fox News called Arizona, which is considered a battleground state for Biden. But the others are very closely fought, and that's actually probably where this thing will get decided.
You mentioned that Fox News called Arizona for Biden, and the Trump campaign is refuting that claim. Can you talk to me a little bit about that process and what this means for what contested election results could look like in other states moving forward?
Well, Arizona's, been changing. I mean, the demographic in Arizona is becoming younger, more Latino, more Asian, and the democratic strength in that state has been growing. It's also a state that's comfortable with mail-in voting, unlike a lot of the states that we're talking about, like Pennsylvania. Mail-in voting is, relatively new to the electorate there, but in Arizona, they've been doing it for years. 60% of the voting in most elections in Arizona is done by mail. So, for all these reasons, I think, some people think, that mail-in voters who are largely Democratic may lift Biden to victory. But as you say, Trump is disputing, Fox News's call of the state, and other networks have not called it yet. So it may be the case that it hasn't actually carried for Biden just yet. He certainly, in the broadcast that I've seen, he's been leading in the precincts that are reporting so far. Biden is, and in this state that is so accustomed to mail-in voting.
And before we started this live, you and I were talking about this idea of a red mirage and whether we're seeing higher numbers for Trump because of people coming in and voting in person today, while mail-in and absentee ballots are still going to be counted for some days to come in some of these key battleground states. Can you talk me through what the timeline is looking like in states like Pennsylvania?
Well, I mean, it could take days. It could be till Friday, or even later. The Democratic lawyers, in trying to get mail-in vote to be adopted as deeply and as widely as possible during this pandemic, obtained a ruling from the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania that says that as long as a mail-in ballot is posted by Election Day, it must be counted if it's received within 3 days of Election Day. So they'll be counting ballots that are coming in for some days to come. And if the state is really close, they'll also be litigating over those ballots. So, this gives you, and this is just one of the battleground states that we're discussing. So this gives you a sense of how, the quick results, today's results, tonight's results may be in question for some time to come, some days to come.
And can you talk me through what both the Trump and Biden campaigns have done to prepare for any litigation that may come from a contested election result?
Well, they've both laid in literally dozens of lawyers in states all across the country, in these battleground states that we're discussing, and also in other states. And they've litigated ahead of the election, in advance of the election, to try to gain advantage over mail-in ballots and other issues like drive-in voting and the number of days after the election by which ballots can be returned. All of this has been fought out in court in advance of the election. And, a lot of people see that as merely a dress rehearsal for the bigger fight over actual ballots as they are returned. Just to get into the Pennsylvania case that I mentioned for a moment, it's about potentially hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots mailed in by voters in Pennsylvania that may have some defect or other. The signature may look strange. There may be some problem with it, some technical problem with it. The Secretary of State of Pennsylvania wants to allow people who voted in that way to come in and cure what is called curing the defective absentee ballot by using a provisional ballot, which is kind of a secondary ballot that you use in a situation like that. A Republican U.S. representative has sued to block that. And actually, though that sounds esoteric, the outcome of Pennsylvania could come down to something like that.
And I'm wondering what your message is to maybe Biden supporters who are a little bit upset tonight and Trump supporters who are excited. What's your message to people who are essentially getting ready to call this election already one way or the other?
I think what I'm picking up, from the news reports that I've been reading and from the reporting that we've been doing as a news organization is just that it's very, very close, and it's probably too early for either side to get excited or despondent about these results. I think in these states that we're discussing, in the Wisconsins, the Michigans, the Pennsylvanias, the Ohio's, I think in those states, we just won't know what the outcome is for a while. Maybe we'll know when we wake up tomorrow, or maybe it will be even later than that, as we were discussing before. And so for either side to get very excited about what it appears, what the returns appear to be in today's voting, in the in-person voting today, is probably premature. Probably this whole process has to play out. All the counting, all the votes, the absentee votes, the mail-in votes, the provisional votes sent in from people overseas, Americans living overseas, and then any legal issues associated with all these late arriving and late counted votes also has to get resolved. So what appears to be the case today may not appear to be the case in a couple of days. We have to wait and let the process play out.
And I'm wondering how tonight's results clear up with anticipation from the Biden and Trump campaigns. Did either side see things being this close based on your conversations with folks on the campaigns?
Well, you hear people in the Obama, Biden, world saying, don't be surprised, don't be shocked and appalled. This is what we thought was going to happen. We thought that day of voting was going to go for the president because in many of these southern states and many of these Sun Belt states, people prefer to vote on the day of the election as opposed to mailing in ballots, which they are wary of because the president is wary of mail-in ballots and has actually warned, very specifically, that he believes that mail-in ballots can in many cases be fraudulent. Culturally, people in these places, that support Trump tend to vote on the day of. So as the votes come pouring in on the day of for Trump, what Biden and Obama would say is, yeah, that's to be expected. Now we need to count all the votes, including the absentee ones, the mail-in votes, and then we'll find out who really won. So that's what they would say in this situation is, don't get too excited. Don't jump to conclusions. This thing needs to play out in full before we'll know.
And as a reporter, what are you going to be looking for in terms of updates throughout the night tonight and tomorrow to really guide the way that you're thinking about how this election is going to shake out?
Well, I think you got to watch these counts closely in all these states that we're talking about. I mean, honestly, but up to the point when we started this conversation, I hadn't seen many surprises. I mean, I had mostly seen states fall into line according to what was expected. Biden was expected to win New York and California. He did. Trump was expected to win Texas and Georgia. He did. So it's when the surprises start to tumble in states in the battleground category that no one is quite sure are to go to one camp or the other. Biden had a lead in the most recent Pennsylvania polls. If someone if credible news services call Pennsylvania for Trump, that would be significant. That would be a big deal. What's happening in Florida, where Trump is leading at the moment, is a big deal. It's these battleground states, and so that's what I'll be watching. And then I think we move, Madison, to the second act, and the second act is, okay, what legal issues get raised in the aftermath of the votes being counted, and that's where I think you may recall in Bush versus Gore 2000, the case was ultimately decided by the Supreme Court, who decided to rule out a number of ballots based on technical grounds. And it really could come down to some kind, if it's a very close election, it could come down to, a legal fight over particular issues in one of these battleground states.
You mentioned Bush v. Gore, and Bush at the time sort of declared victory a little bit early. I'm wondering if you think that Trump or Biden will kind of copy that tactic if they're concerned about this election result going all the way to SCOTUS.
It's hard to say. Trump has said that he'll, if it's very close and he believes some of the ballots, are fraudulent, he'll go to court. Whether he'll come out and declare victory before the count is completed, I don't know. I mean, I can't say whether he would do that or not. Biden has already said that if the count tonight is very close, he may not speak to his supporters tonight. He may wait until tomorrow when he hopes that a clearer picture has emerged.
And is there anything else that you are looking to tonight and tomorrow that we haven't already talked about in terms of just guiding your understanding of how the litigation surrounding any potential contested results could shake out for either candidate?
Well, I think you have to look at, if you want to try to anticipate, where the litigation may go and what the most significant issues in the lawsuits may be, I think you want to look at heavily Democratic counties and areas. I think that the Republicans have been preparing and planning to file lines of legal attack to try to devalidate ballots in heavily Democratic strongholds like Philadelphia, Detroit, Atlanta, for if they need to, for a long time. So that's where I would look for those who want to really try to understand, what the potentially complex litigation that may follow, the vote counting may be. I think it may center on ballots in Democratic areas where Trump lawyers try to use different tactics to declare invalid large numbers, as many ballots from those areas as they possibly can to try to swing the balance for the president.
And one final question for you, Jeff, before we let you go. I know you have a lot of coverage to get to. Our audience has asked a lot about the potential of President Trump refusing to leave office. What do you think the likelihood is of that occurring, and how would the president potentially pull that off?
I was speaking to an academic, a professor at Loyola Marymount University in LA. Justin Levitt is his name. He tracks election litigation about this very topic, and he spoke soothing words. The words are, that won't happen. There will be an outcome. There will be a winner. And the winner on January 20th will occupy the White House. If Trump's the winner, he will occupy the White House. If Biden's the winner, he will occupy the White House. The Secret Service, the other aspects of the U.S. government, the Senate, the House, no institution of U.S. power would have it any other way. That's what he says, and I tend to agree with that. I tend to think that after this process that you and I have been discussing, the counting and then the litigating, unfortunately, will have a winner. There will be a declared winner, as there was in Florida 2000, in Bush v. Gore. And that winner, whoever it may be, whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump, is the person who'll occupy the White House as of January 20th. That's the law, and I'm quite optimistic that the law will be upheld in that regard.
And a heavy-handed question for you, Jeff. Do you have a prediction of the date or timeline where we will have a result for this election?
All I can say is to sort of, drift in the direction that I was going before. I think it may be a few days personally, just because of the complexity of the issues and the threat of litigation. I think it's going to be very, very close. It appears it's going to be very, very close. States like Pennsylvania, as we were discussing earlier, may be counting ballots for some days. Pennsylvania is absolutely critical to the outcome, and there are the legal issues that we discussed. So that all adds up to the fact that before we have a conclusive winner that we all know is the winner, it may be a little while because it takes some time to work through these issues.
And I also want to add that we are hearing from the Associated Press that Joe Biden won Minnesota. Jeff, we are getting a lot of new viewers with us. So before we let you go, I'm going to keep you a little longer because of these viewers here. Yeah. I want to ask you to just recap some of the information you told me about the latest election results we're getting tonight. Where are we, and what should people be looking to as they follow this coverage throughout the night?
Well, states like Minnesota are incredibly significant. it's these Midwestern battleground states, as you and I were discussing, that are probably going to decide the election. It's, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona. Those are the states, those are the states where we'll see a surprise, perhaps one way or the other. Those are the states that are hard fought, both in terms of balloting, campaigning, and also in terms of litigation that may follow, the vote counting. And I really feel like states like those four, are the ones that are likely to determine the outcome here. What we've seen so far, with only a couple of exceptions, I guess you could point to Minnesota as significant. But what we've seen so far, as we were discussing earlier, is results that were expected. Trump kind of swept the board so far in significant southern and Sunbelt states. Biden has won the big western states like California, where I am, Washington State, New York, New Jersey, the northern urban states that he was expected to win. So by and large, so far, with the states where voting is complete enough for news organizations to have made a call, it's pretty much according to plan. It's pretty much according to expectation. It's what happens in these other states that we're discussing, the battleground states like the ones that we mentioned. That's what's probably going to determine the election.
And one potential outcome we haven't talked about at all is the potential for a tie. I know that's pretty unlikely, but just for the sake of argument here, if there is a tie in the Electoral College, what will happen?
If there's a tie in the Electoral College, there's a process that commences. It goes to the House of Representatives, is my understanding. I do believe that that's a pretty unlikely outcome. I think more likely is that we'll just get a very, very close decision where the number of Electoral College votes required to install someone as a president will be reached, but not in an overwhelming way, and certainly not in the sort of blue wave way that some Democrats were hoping for, nor in the sort of red rally way that I think some Republicans are hoping for as they look at the returns that are coming in today. I think it's going to be very, very close, though not a tie. And I think in the end, that's what's going to probably propel this thing, as you and I discussed earlier, to the courts, where a number of issues will be litigated in coming days to try to validate or invalidate some of these ballots. So it's maybe not the most ideal thing, but I think it's going to take a while to parse through all this.
And what's the path look like to get this brought up in courts if the election results are really slim between Trump and Biden? What would either candidate have to do to kind of get this contentious result reviewed by SCOTUS, for example?
Well, so that's a great question, and I think that goes to the specific cases that we touched on earlier but didn't go into depth about. So in Pennsylvania, there are two lawsuits that I think could be quite significant in this regard. And they're a good example of how it might be fought in other states, or maybe it's just Pennsylvania that emerges as the most important, of the states in the litigation environment. But in those two lawsuits, earlier today, it's still Tuesday, right? Yes. So earlier, but on the West Coast it is, and on the East Coast it's not. But on Monday, a lawsuit was filed in federal court in Philadelphia by Republican lawyers against Montgomery County election officials. That's a suburban Philadelphia county, heavily Democratic, where the local election officials said that mail-in ballots, absentee ballots that were found to be defective, they were going to give those voters an opportunity to correct the defects or to cure those ballots and fill out new provisional ballots so that their votes could be counted. So Republican lawyers filed a lawsuit trying to block that. There's a hearing in that case tomorrow morning in federal court in Philadelphia. And then the new development tonight that I was writing about tonight is that a state court lawsuit in Pennsylvania was filed that broadened that issue about the validity of absentee ballots and curing them with provisional ballots statewide. It took what was a fight in one suburban Philadelphia county to the whole state. So that case is in state court, so it would be heard by a state court judge. And as it proceeds up the line in Pennsylvania, as it probably would if it's in hot dispute, to the state Supreme Court, and there's a ruling by the state Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court has tended to provide deference to state courts in deciding such issues. So that's why Republican lawyers filed a case to try to apply that same argument to absentee ballots statewide, because it's hundreds of thousands of ballots that might be found to be defective statewide. And Trump only won Pennsylvania in 2016 by 44,000 votes, right? So if there's hundreds of thousands of ballots statewide in Pennsylvania that can be called into question through this lawsuit, you see the significance of it. I mean, if they can invalidate hundreds of thousands of votes, potentially it could swing the election. That's the sort of thing that, in answer to your question, the lawsuits will be fighting about.
Jeff, thank you so much for that. I do want to point out to our viewers that the Associated Press is calling Ohio and Iowa for President Trump and calling Minnesota again for Joe Biden. As we're getting this breaking news, Jeff, what do you think about those state developments? Does that shake out any further thoughts for you on when and how we might hear the results of this election?
They're both very significant states. I mean, all three of those are very significant states, and they're the battleground states, that we were discussing. I mean, they're among the battleground states that we were discussing. I think that Biden had hope of winning Iowa. There are 3 counties in particular in Iowa, Democratic leaning, where some of the bigger cities are, where the Biden camp had hoped, the vote tally might carry that traditionally Republican state in their favor, but it is a traditionally Republican state, and one that President Trump won easily 4 years ago. He also won Ohio 4 years ago. So, at some point along the line here, Biden needs to win states that Hillary Clinton lost 4 years ago. Ohio was such a state. I think Biden had hoped to win in Ohio, so that that's a significant loss. Minnesota is a significant win, however. And I have to go back, we have to go back to the same 4 states that you and I were talking about earlier, which are, probably where the election will be decided, which is Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona. Yes, the states that you mentioned that have been called in one direction or another are quite significant. And these 4 that I'm mentioning now are very significant as well, and maybe where this election will get decided.
And final question for you, Jeff, which I know I told you what feels like an hour ago, but I promise I'm telling the truth this time. Yeah. If Florida and Texas go to Trump, which it's looking right now in the numbers that both of them will, how hard will it be for Biden to sneak ahead in this election?
Well, once again, I think you got a path. I mean, there's a path for Biden if some of those 4 states that I mentioned do carry for him. But if Trump gets Texas and Florida and Ohio, as he already has been called as having Ohio, and then he also gets some of the bigger states on the list that I mentioned, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, then it starts to get hard. At the moment, with those 4 states in play that I'm talking about, there's a path to 270 votes for Biden. But if some of those 4 states that we're talking about start to get called for Trump, then it gets much harder.
Jeff, I know you have a lot of coverage to get to, so we're going to let you go. But thank you so much for this incredibly illuminating conversation. And thank you to all of our viewers who followed us throughout the night on this election coverage. We're going to continue to bring you all of the breaking news that you need. So follow us here on QuickTake for more. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Madison.